This episode of Man of Prestige, some things listen, there is something called the masculine and the feminine energy. It is what it is. Okay? It is what it is. There's an exception to that rule. However, there's always a woman out there who is not necessarily, there's nothing wrong with her, but she's more so in her masculine. Okay? That means she will rather protect, provide, and she doesn't really need anything from you. Can this always be a good thing? Obviously not, because we are operating within a social construct, either we like to admit that or not. And at least one partner has subscribed subconsciously to that social construct, right? So there are some exceptions, and I want you to consider the exception when you're determining if marriage a partnership or not. Are you with somebody who is an exception? They're not the blanket, statistic. All right, what's going on? Hola. So is marriage a partnership? Is marriage a partnership? I want to share 5 things every man must consider before you decide this for yourself. As usual, I just want to have the conversation. I'm not about to sit down here and tell you if marriage is a partnership or not. But I'm going to share 5 things with you that you should consider. Then after that, I'll tell you my personal opinion. Then I want you to share your opinions with me as well. But let me read this quote quickly. Marriage can be it's a quote, okay? Marriage can be a great partnership. It's also an idea that is often misunderstood. Many people think marriage is about the man having control over the woman, or that it's just for couples who are in love with each other. The truth is, it's not always easy to know if you're ready for marriage, because everyone has different needs and expectations of what they want out of life. With that being said, pick one: partnership or leadership. So there are 5 things I want you to consider when we're thinking about is marriage a partnership or not, right? I'm going to start from top to bottom, or from the last to the first, and not the least, as usual, right? Number 5, romance. Okay, so when we're talking about romance, there are so many things that happen within a relationship, a romantic relationship, right? Either we're talking about boyfriend, girlfriend, fiancés, or marriage. It really doesn't make that much difference outside of the paperwork and making it official, right? But when you're dealing with romance, right, are we just going to be waiting equally for everyone to be ready to, or somebody is usually initiating in the real life, in real world, right? So there's a good chance somebody is always initiating, and there's a good chance that somebody receives better than the other person. Receiving better than the other person is not necessarily an advantage, like a higher advantage. Doesn't necessarily mean that. As a matter of fact, if you're a giver, when you're with somebody who receives and knows how to receive, that it's an advantage for you, even though you're the giver. I know that goes way over the head of a lot of people, but you can rewind the video and watch that again. The fourth thing, or number 4 thing that I want you to consider when you're worrying if marriage is a partnership or not, is an exception of some sort, right? And what is this exception? Let's think about it, right? There are some things listen, there is something called the masculine and the feminine energy. It is what it is. Okay? It is what it is. There's an exception to that rule. However, there's always a woman out there who is not necessarily, there's nothing wrong with her, but she's more so in her masculine. Okay? That means she will rather protect, provide, and she doesn't really need anything from you. Can this always be a good thing? Obviously not, because we are operating within a social construct, either we like to admit that or not. And at least one partner has subscribed subconsciously to that social construct, right? So there are some exceptions, and I want you to consider the exception when you're determining if marriage a partnership or not. Are you with somebody who is an exception? They're not the blanket, statistics, fact, whatever you want to call it, right? But they are the exception. If you're watching this video, gentlemen, it's your responsibility to figure that out. All right, you should know the rule, you should also know the exceptions to the rule. If you don't know the rule, how could you possibly know the exceptions to the rule? um, I'll tell you what my personal rule is later on. But anyway, number three is sexual polarity. I already mentioned a little bit about the masculine and the feminine energy. We need both. I don't care where it's coming from. I don't care if it's coming from the man, but we need both coming from either side. In a dominant way, the masculine is dominating, but creating structure and creating it's a rock of the context, right? So, in order to have sexual polarity, which is a necessity in a typical relationship, and if you say no, it's not a necessity, there's a good chance that your partner, it is a necessity for them, and that makes it a necessity for your relationship. So, I would want you, hopefully, to consider sexual polarity when you're trying to make marriage a partnership, right? As opposed to it should be driven by some sort of leadership. Listen, there's any kind of relationship by default, obviously, it's by default partnership, right? The real question here is that if you had to pick one, would you prefer to have leadership or partnership? See, when you get into certain conversations, you see a lot of women just want partnership, right? But then you see some men in this generation are subscribing to that because they are quote unquote more progressive, but then they wonder why they run into trouble later. That's another thing for another day. But let's just be clear, sexual polarity is needed. It's not about one person being higher than the other, it's about creating something that will create the spark. One is positive, the other is negative. In any kind of power dynamics, either we're talking about physics, chemistry, or whatever you want to call it, it's a reality, right? Number two, words versus action. So your woman comes to you and she tells you, I like partnership, right? Listen, her words are completely different from her words are not necessarily the same thing as her actions. That's what I wanted to say. That's the real thing I wanted to say. Her words, what she says she wants, is not necessarily the truth. The action speaks louder than the words, and you as gentlemen should know that. And this is not a situation where you start engaging argument and then you kill your sexual polarity because you have to be right. You have the need to be right. Come on, gentlemen, you have to figure that part out. It's not everything you have to argue, because yes, argument will kill sexual polarity. So words versus action is something you should consider. For the most part, the action is probably what you should focus on, right? And give her the freedom to use her words how she wants to use her words. I like partnership. That's what you want, babe? Sure, absolutely. We are partners. Because again, remember, any relationship by default is partners. We're just talking about you as a man. What are your priorities in how you set the tone? Are you showing up as a leader, or I got to make sure everything is equal? How's that working out for you with regards to sexual polarity? Again, number one, leadership versus partnership. I want you to consider that. I want you to consider which one is more important here. When you lead with leadership, leadership will know the right spaces and context and the right spots where partnership is required in the relationship. Okay, that's part of the leadership. But when you don't have leadership, partnership will become chaos. Remember, default is partnership because it's a relationship, but leadership is something you have to be intentional about, because if you're not intentional about it, there's a good chance that you're going to create a bunch of chaos. Now, as far as my personal opinion is concerned, I will always pick leadership, and I think I just share that. I think marriage is a benevolent partnership. Like, of course I consider everything, but I also realize that I am with a woman, a woman who will belong in what I call a typical woman, and I'm aware of that she's not the exception to the rule. So even though she doesn't say it out in words, I know that she appreciates that I show up as a leader and set the tone of everything that's going on in our marriage.